The winners and the losers of African football at the just ended 2026 FIFA World Cup in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Beyond the scoreboard. Who really won the World Cup? The World Cup is over. The celebrations have stopped. The celebrations have happened. The heartbreak has settled. The flags have been lowered, and the players have returned to their clubs. But football is never just about the final score, because while some teams won matches, others won something much bigger: respect, credibility, visibility, and opportunity. And while some lost on the pitch, others may have lost something far more important: trust, reputation, and momentum. So today on BallAfrica, we are asking different questions. Who are the real winners and the losers of African football at the World Cup? Not just the teams, the coaches, the players, the federations, CAF, African football media, the fans, the sponsors, and the commercial partners who saw Africa's football story unfold before the world. Because sometimes you can lose a football match and still win. And sometimes you can win a match and still have some serious questions to answer. Welcome to BallAfrica. This is your host, Easy Lise. Winner number one, African football's global reputation. Let's begin with the biggest winner. African football itself is the winner. For years, African football has been discussed through the language of potential. One day, Africa will win the World Cup. One day, African teams will compete with the best. One day, African football would be taken seriously. But at this World Cup, African teams did not arrive asking for permission. They arrived competing. They arrived winning. They arrived challenging established football powers. And they demonstrated something important. African football is no longer a curiosity at the World Cup. It is a serious competitive force. The question is no longer whether Africa belongs. Africa already belongs. The question now is, how consistently can Africa compete at the highest level? And that is a very different conversation. Winner number two, the African football players. The biggest individual winners were the players. For many African footballers, the World Cup is not simply a tournament. It's an audition, an opportunity to change the trajectory of a career. A strong World Cup can mean a bigger transfer, a better contract, greater international recognition, commercial opportunities, and stronger bargaining position. Several African players emerged with their reputation significantly enhanced. And importantly, many of them demonstrated that African football is producing players capable of performing under the highest pressure. But here's the challenge. African federations and African football's commercial ecosystem must become better at protecting and maximizing the value of their players. Too often, African players become global stars while the systems around them remain weak. The players win, the agents win, the European clubs win, but the African football ecosystem sometimes captures very little of the long-term value. That must change. Winner number three, the coaches. The World Cup also belonged to the coaches who demonstrated that African teams can compete tactically, not simply emotionally. For years, African teams have often been described as athletic, passionate, and unpredictable, but the best performances at this World Cup showed more structure, discipline, tactical identity, preparation. The successful coaches demonstrated that African teams can play with a clear tactical philosophy. And that brings us to an important question. Should African national teams prioritize African coaches, or should they simply hire the best coach available, regardless of nationality? The debate is not going away. Foreign coaches can bring experience, systems, and access to international networks and opportunities. African coaches bring cultural understanding, knowledge of the players, and a deeper understanding of the football environment. The answer may not be African versus foreign. The real answer may be African football needs to develop a world-class coaching ecosystem. That means better coaching education, better technical departments, better domestic leagues, better tactical development, better investment in African coaches. Because if Africa wants to consistently win at the highest level, the coaches' pipeline must become as strong as the player pipeline. The federations, the national federations, some winners, some losers. Now we arrive at one of the most complicated categories, the football federations. Some federations emerged from the World Cup with increased credibility. They demonstrated preparation, stability, clear leadership, effective player management, strong communications. Others, however, must ask difficult questions. There are challenges and concerns because success on the pitch can sometimes hide problems of it. Did the federation have a long-term plan? Was the team built sustainably? Did the federation maximize commercial opportunities? Did it communicate effectively with supporters? Did it invest in the team before the tournament, or simply hope for a miracle? This is where African football must become more honest A World Cup should not be the beginning of a 4-year project. It should be the result of one. The best federations will now ask, how do we build on this? The weaker ones may simply celebrate the moment and wait until the next qualification campaign. And that is exactly how progress disappears. CAF, the Confederation of African Football, a winner, but with more work to do. A lot needs to be done. CAF itself is another complicated story. The growth of African football's global profile is unquestionably positive for the Confederation. The World Cup demonstrated the value of African football to the global game, but with greater visibility comes greater responsibility. CAF now has the opportunity to ask a couple of questions. How do we convert sporting success into commercial growth? How do we improve competitions? How do we strengthen member associations? How do we improve broadcasting? How do we create more revenue for African football? How do we ensure that success is not concentrated in only a few countries? The world is watching African football more closely than ever. That means CAF has the opportunity to position itself as a stronger global football institution. But that requires transparency, professionalism, innovation, and execution. The World Cup gave African football attention. The real challenge is converting that attention into sustainable progress. Now let's look at the African football media, a major winner. One group that deserves more credit is the African football media. African football stories are no longer being told only by international media organizations. African journalists, creators, podcasters, analysts, and digital platforms increasingly telling their own stories. And that matters because for decades, African football was often analyzed through an external lens. Now, Africa is increasingly telling its own story. That is powerful. But African sports media must also continue to evolve. We need more investigative journalism, more tactical analysis, more business coverage, more governance reporting, more storytelling beyond match results. African football needs media that can celebrate success and ask difficult questions. This is part of the mission of BallAfrica because African football deserves storytelling that is passionate, but also very thoughtful, critical, but fair, proud, but not blind. The fans, the biggest winners of all. Let's be honest. African football fans are often the biggest winners, the biggest victims of the game. They provide the passion, the atmosphere, the identity, the emotional investment, the colorfulness, the beauty, the dances, the traditions. African fans travel, they spend, they support, they suffer, they celebrate. At this World Cup, African fans once again demonstrated that football is not just a sport on the continent. It is identity, it's culture, it's community. But the African football industry must ask this question. Are African fans receiving the value they deserve? Are tickets affordable? Are broadcasts accessible? Are supporters treated as customers? Are fans being included in the commercial growth of the game? Because the African fans should not only be invited to celebrate success, they should be part of the future that is being built. They are part of the DNA of African football. Let's talk about the sponsors and commercial partners. Opportunities were missed and opportunities were seized. Let's talk about African football business. African football is has one of the most passionate fan bases in the world. The world can demonstrate that African football has massive audiences, strong emotional engagement, global diaspora communities, significant commercial potential. But that question is, did sponsors fully capitalize on that opportunity? There's a difference between sponsoring African football and truly understanding African football. The smartest brands would recognize that African football is not one market. It's 54 countries, multiple languages, different cultures, different consumer behaviors, and global diaspora spread across Europe, North America, Asia, and the Middle East, and part of South America. The commercial opportunity is enormous, but it requires strategy. African football should not simply be viewed as a sponsor opportunity. It should be viewed as a global platform for tourism, trade, investment, technology, culture, youth development, and international relations. This is where sports business leaders, federations, governments, and brands must think differently. The question should not be, how much does it cost to sponsor African football? The question should be, what can African football help us build? The biggest losers from this 2026 FIFA World Cup on the African side is complacency. I repeat, complacency. So who were the losers? In my view, the biggest loser in African football is not necessarily a specific team or a country. It is complacency. The belief that qualification is enough, that a good tournament is enough, that talent alone is enough, that passion is enough. It is not. Africa has talent, Africa has passion, Africa has supporters, Africa has players competing at the biggest clubs in the world. What Africa needs now is consistency, the ability to build systems, the ability to invest long term, the ability to move beyond celebration and into execution. Because the World Cup is not a destination. The World Cup is a measuring stick. So who are the winners and the losers of African football at this 2026 FIFA World Cup? The players who proved they belong, winners. The coaches who demonstrated tactical maturity, winners. The federations that prepare properly and build sustainable programs, winners. The fans who once again showed the world the power of African football, absolute winners. African football media that is increasingly telling its own story, winners. CAF, potentially one of the biggest winners, but only if it can convert global attention into long-term institutional progress. And the losers, any organization, federation, or leader who believes that one successful tournament is enough because African football has reached a new moment. The world is watching, the players are ready, the fans are ready, the market is ready. The question is, are the institutions ready? The World Cup is over, but African football's next chapter is only beginning. This is BallAfrica, where we don't just discuss the game, we tell the stories behind the game, we examine the systems behind the success, and we communicate, and we continue to ask the questions that matter. Until next time, Africa is not waiting for permission to take its place on the global stage of football. Africa is already there. Now, it must build the institutions capable of staying there.